One more information, this session will also be live streamed on YouTube. You see the button here, so we might have people watching over YouTube also. Let me see. Well, due to the limited time we have, I would say we start, and maybe some people will join later to this session. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today to this online session, which is titled Mitigation of Greenhouse Gas Emissions through Effective Peatland Management, that takes place in the framework of the Land Act Online Encounter 2020, as you know. Peatlands and organic soils contain 30% of the world's soil carbon, while covering only 3% of the Earth's land area. They are the largest natural terrestrial carbon store and store more carbon than all other vegetation types in the world combined. And I suppose this is reason enough to dedicate our session to this important issue. Our session is limited to 1 hour, as you know, so I try to keep it short. Some housekeeping rules before we start, in order to avoid disturbing background noises. Please turn off your microphones while not speaking. If you have questions, please pose them via the chat. As we don't have too many participants here, you will probably also get the chance to pose your questions directly to the speakers after the presentations. All questions will be collected and then redirected to the speakers. I would like to introduce myself for those who don't know me. My name is Katja Dels. I will moderate the session this afternoon, and also with me my colleague Christoph Gilgen, who will act as co-moderator and collect your questions. And hopefully we'll try to solve any technical issues popping up during the session. Christoph and I work for BVVG's International Consulting Department. BVVG Agri-Forest Privatization Agency is a state-owned agency that in Germany is responsible for managing state-owned agricultural and forest land. And I would like to share a short presentation with you, some slides. There we are. Aside of this core assignment that we have in Germany, BVVG also works in advisory projects of the German government. And one of these projects, the so-called German-Ukrainian Agricultural Policy Dialogue, that is financed by the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, has been active in Ukraine for many years already. BVVG implements the so-called land component of this project. The project has 3 components, 3 pillars, and we implement the land component. And by the way, Christoph is the coordinator of this component. In the framework of the project, Olga has mentioned it already. In 2019, inter alia, we had more activities, but one activity we focused on was the topic of peatland management against the background of greenhouse gas mitigation measures. And within this framework, we hosted a study tour for Ukrainian experts from the central, regional, and local level to Germany. And we also organized an expert mission to Volyn Oblast in the northwestern region of Ukraine in order to discuss options for peatland management with the aim of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. 2 experts from our partner institution. Sorry, I will get back to to you. I will stop the screen. Two experts from our partner institutions, one from the Federal Agency of Environment of the Federal State of Brandenburg, and one from Michael Zucco Foundation, took part in this mission, in this expert mission, and I am glad that the two institutions are also present today with two speakers that are going to share their experience with us. Having said this, in our session today, we are going to focus on three main issues. Firstly, we would like to show how the federal state of Brandenburg is implementing greenhouse gas emission mitigation measures on peatland based on the German federal climate policy and existing implementation policies and programs on the federal states level using examples from Brandenburg. Second, we want to focus on Ukraine's peatlands, especially the Polessia region that has abundant Maya areas, and highlight a few figures roughly quantifying GHG emissions from peatlands in the region, and discuss the options for greenhouse gas mitigation through peatland protection and sustainable management, bearing in mind also the economic constraints and development aims of this rather remote region in Ukraine. And third, we want to highlight current discussions in Ukraine regarding greenhouse gas mitigation in the framework of Ukraine's climate change policy or climate protection policy, the status quo regarding consideration of peatlands in the national mitigation strategy, and the possibilities for civil society to actively take part in the policy making process. For this, we have invited three speakers: Bas Spanias, who works for the Agency of Environment in the Federal State of Brandenburg, Andrea Sabah, working for Michael Zucco Foundation, and last but not least, Natalia Cossack from Eco Action, an Ukrainian NGO dealing with environmental and climate change issues in Ukraine. And having said this, and once again, as I mentioned, please turn off your microphones while you're not speaking, and pose your questions via the chat. If we keep this small round, then of course you will get the chance to directly pose your questions in the discussion round. We are going to go through the presentations without question and answer session, and then after that have the possibility for the discussion round. And but we have to keep in mind that the organizers are going to stop the session after 1 hour sharp. So having said this, thank you very much for your attention. And now, Bas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. Do you see it and hear me? Okay. My name is Bas Spanjes. I work for the Environmental Agency of the Federal State of Brandenburg in the east of Germany. And I'm going to present you some of our strategies in order to manage our peatlands in a climate-friendly way. Also, Germany agreed on the Paris climate targets, and that means that Germany has to be climate neutral in the year 2050. And the federal states, like Brandenburg, play an important role in the implementation of measures in order to achieve these climate targets. The total emissions in Brandenburg in 2019 were about 55 million tons of CO2 equivalents. And what a lot of people don't know is that also drained peatlands produce a lot of greenhouse gases. I would say that this is the biggest unknown source of all the greenhouse gases. And Brandenburg has a lot of peatlands, that you can see in the figure on the right, a lot of peatlands and a lot of soils with high organic matter. And a lot of these peatlands are in agricultural use. And because of the agriculture, most of the peatlands are drained, and drained peatlands has usually lower water levels, and that's why oxygen can infiltrate into the soils and convert organic matter into greenhouse gases, explained in a very easy way. And due to these processes, the peatlands in Brandenburg produce about 6.8 million tons in the year 2012. And that was about 9% of the total emissions this year. And that's comparable with other big sources like traffic, industry, and households. So what are we going to do? You see in the figure here, the greenhouse gas emissions by different land uses on peatlands in ton CO2 equivalents per year per hectare. And you see that a drained arable peatland can produce about 37 tons of CO2 equivalents. And that's really a lot. You can drive more than 3 times around the earth to produce the same amount of greenhouse gases with a car. Of course, there is a big variety in these emissions, and these are the maximum amounts. So the drained meadows produce about 29 tons per year per hectare. Polludiculture, I'm going to explain later what it is, 5 till 8 tons, and near natural peatlands about 0 till 8 or even negative emissions. So the whole idea behind our strategy is if we can transform these drained arable peatlands and these drained meadows into polludicultures or into near natural peatlands, we can potentially save a lot of greenhouse gases. So due to draining, the peat degrades and produces a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and actually the measures behind this strategy is actually always the same. It's raising the water level. The peat must be wet again. And one solution is a polludiculture, and that's the wet agriculture and forestry on peatlands. And due to this strategy, we can potentially reduce the greenhouse gas emissions about 30 tons per CO2 equivalents per hectare per year. But there are also a lot of other benefits like water retention, water purification, or nature conservation. So Brandenburg has some strategies, and in this presentation, I'm going to present 3 of them. And the first one is a subsidy program for peat sustainable water regimes. And the farmers in Brandenburg can get 387 euros per hectare if they raise the water levels till 10 centimeters below surface year round and 30 centimeters below surface between the 1st of June and the 15th of October. Of course, the higher water levels are always good, the weather, the better. And this is a environment climate measure, and that's on top of the direct payments from the cap from the Common Agricultural Policy, paid out of the second pillar. And the aim is slowing down the peat degradation and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we estimate that with this measure, we could save about 20 tons per hectare. The farmers are not allowed to use fertilizers and pesticides, and they have to allow scientists on their field in order to do scientific monitoring. And that's mainly about vegetation changes, because if you raise the water level, the vegetation is going to change. The second strategy is actually quite a logical one if you look at the first strategy, because if you're going to raise the water levels, the fields are going to be more wetter, and it's more difficult for the farmers to manage their field, to harvest, to mow, to prepare their fields. So that's why we have a financial support for new and adapted technology, and the farmers can get 60% of their investment back from the federal state. Of course, they have to raise the water levels again, and a big challenge is that the pressure from the technology on the soil must be under 0.612 kilograms per square centimeter. So that's why we organize a lot of workshops and technology demonstrations for farmers, and also 2 big conferences in order to motivate the farmers to buy these kind of technologies. And then our third strategy, that's the establishment of polludicultures. And I'm bringing you to one of the biggest peatland areas in Brandenburg. That's called the Rhinluch. And the Rhinluch has some of these typical peatland problems like soil subsidence, climate gas emissions, but we also have to adapt to the new climate conditions. The last 2 years were really extremely dry with 450 millimeters of precipitation the last 2 years. And so we are looking for alternatives. And if we are continuing draining like we did in this way, you see in the figure below on the left side, we gonna lose.
I
don't know who that is, but okay.
Please turn out microphones.
Can you switch them off all?
Yeah.
Just continue. So we try to create a demonstration project, and the last year we had a lot of discussions and talks with 6 farmers that are involved, and we try to establish 330 hectares of polludicultures, and that are reed, cattail, reed canary grass, sedges, and wild water buffalo. And you could use these polludicultures for energy, for material, and for fodder. So, as I mentioned already, we had 2 really extreme dry years, and you can see already that the farmers that they had the climate friendly water levels, that they are actually quite satisfied because they had really good yields due to the wet circumstances in comparison with their neighbors. So my take-home message would be we have to stop draining the fields also in the winter, because we need the winter water to prevent droughts in summer and also to prevent greenhouse gas emissions from the peatlands. Thanks for your attention, and for more information, check our website. That's only in German, but we also made a little movie from one conference that's in German with English subtitles, or you can send me an email in German, English, or in Dutch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bas. We have 2 speakers, David and Devi. Please turn off your microphones because we have a lot of background noises. I will now, as I announced, give the floor to our second speaker, Andrea Sabah. Please, the floor is yours.
First, we'll switch on my sound and then my screen. And now everybody should see my presentation. So welcome everybody. My name is Andrea Sabah. I'm a landscape and peatland ecologist working for the Michael Suckow Foundation, who is partner at the Greifswald-Meyer Center, a competence center for all peatland issues situated in the northeast of Germany at the Baltic Sea coast. Here you see an overview about peatland distribution in the Ukraine, and you can clearly see that there is a concentration in the northwest. This is the Polessia region, the vast floodplain area bordering with Belarus, Poland, and Russia. And here you find 700,000 hectares of peatlands. In total, in the Ukraine, we have 1.2 million hectares, of which 50% are drained and already degraded. Situated in the Polessia in the Volyn Oblast are 3 joint municipalities, Sablodivska, Prystalenska, and Sumanska, and these are there's a special issue because they are going to get state-owned land into their responsibilities, and these lands contain approximately 20,000 hectares of peatland area. So we were requested to give recommendations on wise use management of these peat soils in regard to climate change mitigation adaptation, as well as to local economic development. The options were discussed within the land component of the German-Ukrainian agricultural policy dialogue, as Katja already introduced. So last year we had a visit to all three of these joint municipalities, and to give you an impression, I show you one example. So we were shown many sites in the joint municipalities, and I made a desk study after the visit and tried to get an overview of the land cover and made visual estimates based on satellite imagery. And you can see here there is still a lot of near almost intact peatland present next to drained peatlands for agricultural purpose, and also peat extraction activities are ongoing. We were also visiting some sites in detail, so we had a look on protected areas, so protected peatlands and mayas with threatened and endangered species. We visited a peat briquetting factory in Wollündorf, who produces peat briquettes for energy production. And we visited farmers who work on drained peatlands with grasslands or croplands for cattle and meat production. We also got statistical data from the joint municipalities on land use and peatland distribution. And based on these statistical data, we made a rough calculation on greenhouse emissions based on several assumptions. We assumed that nature-near peatlands are emitting 0 tons of CO2 equivalents. And you see the other values are comparable moderates to the values Bas presented in his presentation. And additionally, we also have regarded peat extraction inclusive of the combustion of the peat. So first, I gave some facts for the nature-near areas. So 1/3 of the peatland area is apparently nature-near, avoiding at the moment around 170,000 tons of CO2 per year. And 1/3 of these nature-near peatlands are currently under protected status. So these avoided emissions are somehow secured. Avoided emissions are to be seen as an ecological capital. There are estimates for environmental damage costs produced by tons of CO2 equivalents emitted of 180 euros. And the good news is, so we have still a lot of saved emissions in the joint municipalities, but that bears also a big responsibility when these nature-near peatland areas are transformed from the state to the joint municipality. On the drained peatland areas, so 2/3 of the peatland area are drained for different purposes, and in total they emit 0.2 millions of CO2 equivalents after our rough estimates. So emissions from drained peatlands, of course, cause environmental damage and costs. So we gave also some recommendations for a transformation path towards a low or zero emission peatland management, containing several points. So long-term safeguarding of the still natural peatlands, rapid exit from peat extraction activities, exit from arable land use on peatlands, and successive rewetting and utilization of peatland areas in conversion into extensive wet or moist grassland use by 2030, and finally a transformation into climate neutral paludicultures by 2050. So some words to paludiculture. Bas already gave a good overview what is possible and what is already implemented or trying to be stimulated in Brandenburg just shortly. Paludiculture means a wet cultivation of peatlands. You can use wet meadows with existing vegetation. So use the existing vegetation, harvest for hay, for energy, or for materials. You can use it as rangelands with adapted cattle like the water buffalo. Or you can implement cultures with suitable wetland species like reed, cattail, black alder, or peat mosses. The One thing is obligatory, the management under peat conserving conditions. So water levels must almost, in the mean, must be in surface level. So the central problem, as we already also saw in the presentation of Bas, is that we are working on wet and soft soils and that have limited bearing capacity. So the technology for site management and harvest must be adapted. The plant biomass properties are different from conventional crops from agriculture, so there must be new experience collected. Quality standards in biomass processing and utilization must be developed so that in the end we can develop an economy that is sustainable and also a sustainable management scheme for the peatland. There are some adaptation approaches already existing. So for conventional technology, there are these delta tracks, as you can see in the upper right picture. We have small sized or lightweighted machinery like this small tractor or this special equipment for harvesting wheat, the Saiga, which is equipped with balloon tires and can almost float, or track-chained vehicles that are very heavy, but due to the big contact area also have a minor impact on the ground. But polluted is new ground, and each aspect of the management scheme must be developed and optimized in future. So from training to the right plant species, the technology, management schemes, infrastructure and logistic products, value creation concepts all need to be developed and improved. And for that is a lot of research still necessary. It means also that it is a conversion from a traditional existing drainage-based system to a wet system. And that means it bears high obstacles for the individual land user or the farmer. So high investment costs need to be invested for rewetting, planting the right species, and investments in special technology. So the farmer acts as a pioneer and bears high risks. And for that, he needs compensation or incentives to really take the step for conversion. The high benefits for society are yet not priced in. So wet peatlands or re-wetted peatlands are good for the climate. So for climate protection, they are good for water protection, soil protection, for protection of biodiversity. And there is no remuneration of these services now at the moment, but that need to be developed to find some pricing also for that. For example, something like a peatland or climate farmer certificate could help here. It's a kind of shift of paradigm. So we have to catch up with 10,000 years of experience in drainage-based agriculture. And we don't have a lot of time. So till 2050, we want to be climate neutral. And for that reason, all peatlands must be wet. All peatlands, also all peatlands under use must be wet. And for reaching that target, we need to be very clever and very fast. With this, I want to close my presentation. So thank you for your attention. Peatlands must be wet, and I hope they will be wet as we need them in 2050. If you want to have more information, you can find under this website, moorwissen.de. It's also available in English there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for giving us an overview also over the Walloon region, which is rich, as you said, in Maya, and to quantify the level of avoided emissions, as you said, by keeping peatland wet or in its natural status, but also showing, quantifying a little bit what environmental damage is done by using peatland for agriculture or greenland in the Ukraine area, as Bas has shown for the federal states of Brandenburg case. Also, I think interesting for the participants, the topic of polluticulture as a new technology to use wet peatlands, keeping them wet and using them economically at the same time. something not only interesting in the German surrounding, but also, of course, could be an option for Ukraine. And I think that's something we can discuss later on. Before we start with the discussion, I would like to, last but not least, give the floor to Natalia Cossack, she's a representative of a Ukrainian NGO. Natalia, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Natalia and working from Kyiv, Ukraine, in the NGO Eco Action, Eco-Dia in Ukraine. So our NGO was founded in 2017, and since that time we focus on climate policy, energy issues, and industrial pollution. Our climate policy work is focused on four main strategies, which are actually around public mobilization and direct work with decision makers. So as you see here, starting from the offline mobilizations like climate strike last year, and to the online mobilization and media work all over Ukraine. Then for sure participation in public hearings, working groups, official meetings, so on, as you could see on the next photo from the parliament. And for sure evidence-based basis for our positions, as this water is coming modeling, which we also launched last year, about the impacts of Black Sea water rise. So this is how we work as a civil society NGO in Ukraine in the sphere of policy and climate. So if we look on the overall climate policy of Ukraine, definitely we should mention that nationally determined contribution to Paris Agreement, you could see it on this a bit maybe complicated graph as NDC1, it was critically insufficient. This target is leading Ukraine to leading the world to more than 4 degrees temperature rise by the end of this century, which is not acceptable. And moreover, it is not reachable, as you could see from the actual emissions level. That is why the next NDC, which should be determined and established this year, and actually it had to be done early this year, but still under development, this second NDC should definitely include ambitious targets and ambitious goals. That is why we, as representatives of civil society, started developing roadmap for climate goals for Ukraine 2030, with the idea that this could be the basis for implementation of ambitious NDC2. This roadmap covers 5 key sectors of Ukrainian economy, which is responsible for 70% of all emissions. You could see here, this is the sectors of energy, buildings and housing, transport, waste, and for sure agriculture, forestry, and the land use. The roadmap was developed together with the independent experts and civil society, and totally more than 40 NGOs adopted this roadmap and took it as a basis for their policy work. So let's look at the last sector, as it's the topic of today's meeting, a bit closer. As you could see, the greenhouse gas emissions in the land use change and forestry sector of Ukraine are clearly tends to reduce greenhouse gas absorption capacity. This in 2018 even became positive, as the absorption capacity was less than emissions from the sector. This is due to two key factors. These are the intensification of agriculture, mainly using more land and using other crops, and changes in the forestry sector, meaning more harvest removals and more forest fires and decline of forest quality. So what is the role of peatlands in all this picture? As we just heard, peatland could contribute to the climate issues in two ways. They after peat extraction, they produce emissions, and definitely the peatland management contributes to the emissions. As you could see, the peat extraction dropped significantly after collapse of Soviet Union and after stopping of the companies working in this sector. But still, we believe that there is a lot of room for further closing down. And peatland management. Actually, the information about the actual management types is limited, and calculations of the emissions are also not available. So main troubles and main risks which are associated with the current peatland use on the national level is the fires, which you could see here, the fires including the Chernobyl area, which are especially worrying for population and journalists. So what about the policy? You would be surprised, but the national policy on peatlands was actually last year implemented in the approval of the irrigation and drainage strategy 2030. It means that the focus of the national policy currently now is making more dried peatlands all over the country to support agriculture. That is why we focused on the few key goals in our roadmap, as I mentioned, supported with the expert and other civil society organizations. So the first clearly is the goal connected to the forest capacity of increasing forest capacity as carbon sink. And this is expected to be done through increasing forest areas, forest biomass, and reducing forest fires and degradation of the habitats. Skipping the second goal, and the agriculture goal is actually to reduce emissions from agricultural land use. And this is expected to be done through excluding 50% of arable land from cultivation and increasing pasture territories and introduction of more sustainable agriculture. Livestock goal, the goal number 4, is about keeping the emissions from the livestock on the level of 2017 or less, but not more. And finally, goal 2 on peatlands. We put this goal separately from forestry and agriculture on purpose to pay special attention of decision makers on its extraordinary role in climate policy. And we are sure that it is both ambitious and realistic to first reduce peat extraction for 90% from 2018, and second, to recover dried peatlands to wetlands, but the numerical data here are missing, so we can't put it with numbers. And finally, so what we do with these goals? We, as all other policy work, we go through communication campaigns, We address policymakers directly, participate in the expert groups and working groups like on NDC2 development and so on, and support other NGOs' work through sub-granting, through expertise, and with the information flow. So here is the picture from the civil society, and let's change the world together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for this interesting presentation and giving us an insight also to your work as an NGO dealing with climate issues. I have not yet seen any questions in the chat, so I would like to ask you, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Meanwhile, I have some questions prepared for the speakers to elaborate on, and I will start with Natalia, because Natalia, you just mentioned there's legislation shortly has been endorsed in Ukraine dealing with the irrigation topic and drainage topic, which goes contrary to the idea of peatland protection. So my question to you is, and you can elaborate on that a bit, how realistic is it from your point of view that in Ukraine a major focus will be put on sustainable peatland management and peatland protection with the overall within the overall greenhouse gas mitigation strategy, given the fact that in policy making, not only in Ukraine, other sectors such as energy and industry are often discussed more prominently than the land use and land use change and forestry sector? And second questions, are there any project activities going on in Ukraine regarding restoration of dry peatland? And do these project results somehow have an impact on the national climate policy? Maybe you can give us a brief estimation.
Thanks for your questions. That's definitely interesting, and also I welcome participants also to put their questions. So regarding how realistic it is that the peatland priorities are considered, my point of view that it is highly unrealistic. Unfortunately, with the current policy tendency which we see on the national level, considering this irrigation strategy adopted just last year, and considering the clear priority for coal and for fuels, unsustainable fuels, which are now put by the Ministry of Energy as the top priority, I'm almost sure that in the near future, there is no chances neither for prioritizing it on the national level, nor for the financial support, which is so needed, as we just heard from the previous speakers. So I would clearly put here the key strategy to go through the local level, to support the local municipalities with pilot projects, with convincing for the benefits which are possible, but we can't really put on the polluted culture as an option now, exactly because it is so much needed with investments and support. More realistic is the argument regarding fires. That is what we clearly see each year. The fires of peatland are troubling a lot, and this is what citizens see, this is what journalists are worried about, and each year our organization gets the tons of requests from journalists. What's going on, why the fire is everywhere, and here we clearly stress that this is like this year we had warm winter, dry season, dry winter, and the fires which became more extraordinary. So we each year put the emphasis on the climate change impacts and the need to recover the peatlands. So I would put the strategy, main strategy here. And regarding the projects, as far as I know, at least two projects which were implemented in Ukraine. No, actually three. The one which was mentioned today, which is still to be implemented in practice regarding peatland restoration. Then a few years ago, I was participating also in this very small restoration activity in the marsh near Lviv, in the Rostocha National Park, National Reserve, sorry. And this was very, very small scale, so it can't be evaluated as an impact. And also, I know that in Chernihiv Oblast, there was a big project on the land restoration, the peatland restoration, with a really sustainable financing. After almost 2 million euros were supported the action, but unfortunately the result on the policy level, we as an organization which is involved in constant monitoring, we didn't soar, and as well as the overall picture of this territory didn't change as well. So I am sure that we need more effective and efficient projects to showcase the issue on the national level.
Thank you very much, Natalia. We have a question in the chat to our German speakers. I guess Andreas, because he has been in Ukraine. How aware are the representatives of the Ukrainian region you visited of alternative possibilities of peatland management? And what could be next steps for cooperation from your point of view?
Yes, thanks for the question. I think the most important next step is really, I come to the first part of the question. How aware are the responsible persons in Ukraine? So we made some exchange of knowledge and transferred also knowledge. We invited also some people to Greifswald. It was also organized by BVG. They had an expert tour, and we visited some examples for polludiculture and gave a workshop where we introduced all the possibilities and all the also all the obstacles we see at the moment and all the things that we see that need to be tackled to really bring it to the ground. So there is information already given, but of course it's not in a broad awareness at the moment. So it would be also part of next step in cooperation is to still awareness raising, that there is need for awareness raising. Other further steps would be an update and evaluation of the statistical data to really have spatial data and knowledge about where are peatlands, where are they distributed, and what is the status of drainage system, so that you really can create some scenario where you can start with rewetting and improving things. And then the further step would be a feasibility study that you check which are the stakeholders that are relevant for wise and sustainable management of peatlands, and who are practitioners who have already some experience in managing wet and soft soils. So there is also in Ukraine, there are enterprises who do reed harvest, for example, under wet conditions or in winter with special equipment. So there is knowledge available, but that must be brought together within a feasibility study so that you create a network of people who have experience, share experiences, and then identify the right spot where you can implement polludiculture pilots and demonstrate that it works. As Natalia said, that would be the only possibility to show that it works, if it works in reality, and then it will be imitated by others. So that is at the moment the only way to bring it to upscale on larger areas.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I would like to involve Bas also. Bas, you have demonstrated the 3 strategies you have in Brandenburg and also the financing support. Now, what kind of measures would you suggest for Ukraine, bearing in mind that these financial supports are probably not available in the Ukrainian environment? Would you, let's say you talk to a farmer, would you advise to be brave and go into polluticulture, given the fact that this is a very new and very sensible technology, also from an economic point of view? Could you please add?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important from both sides. First, how do we cultivate polluticultures? That's, of course, that's new land, what Andreas also told. And don't forget, for example, in the Netherlands, 50 years ago, they didn't know how to cultivate maize. And they spent millions and millions and millions on education programs in order to cultivate maize. And look at the damage that we have now, I would say. So a lot of work has to be done on the cultivation side. The other thing is we have to work on the market side. And I think that's, last week I did an interview with all our 6 farmers, and they are actually willing to grow all the crops, all the polluticultures that I've mentioned. But of course, there must be a market for it. So they need to sell it. And I think, yeah, if you look at Germany or you look at the Ukraine, this is the most important thing. And there is some, for example, the reed. We import a lot of reed from China. And that costs, of course, a lot of CO2 emissions to bring the containers here to Europe. And then we open the containers and everything's rotten. We can also try to produce that more regionally. I don't know if the Ukraine is so regional for us, but for themselves, for example. So I think there is potentially a big market. And on the other hand, I think in the future, a lot of people are looking now for technical solutions to extract CO2 from out of the atmosphere. Well, actually, a peat system is a natural CO2 extraction system. So probably with CO2 certificates and everything, yeah, well, that's also a business model maybe in the future to do that. And of course, yeah, then the peat extraction, that must be stopped, but I heard that already. And you could produce like 20 tons of biomass from 1 hectare of peatland, and you could also use that as a fuel. So there are more options, I guess. But it's new land.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we all understood that polluticulture is a very exciting new field, but also bears a few risks if we leave the farmers alone. So what is needed is international support for pilot projects, also more research. Even in Germany, we discussed in our preparatory meetings that, in fact, there's no mitigation strategy also in Germany that quantifies mitigation attempts from peatlands, so that even, not even, but also in other countries is a topic where awareness raising is definitely still necessary. I just got a message from Niels, from the organizers. We only have 2 minutes left. This hour went by really fast as we expected. So I would like to close this session by saying thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much to our speakers. We are going to follow up on the topic also within the project. I indicated to the people involved that we are planning another project follow-up meeting to see how we can catch up with the topic, and Natalia will also be very welcome to follow up. I will give you the details later. To all the external participants that we have in the session and also on YouTube maybe, thank you very much for listening to this exciting topic. We hope we rose some awareness for peatland protection and sustainable management. Thank you very much, everybody. This session will be closed now. Thank you.